two main pathways to arrive at corrosion control. Either A, the water system can have a second action level exceedance, and that can either be copper or lead, or it can be a new water system, whether it's surface water or groundwater with corrosive water. They're going to end up having to install corrosion control as part of the design process and initial construction phase. And so I generally do not interact with them until that construction phase is complete. With the first ones, with the second action level exceedance, I'm going to interact with them during phase one, which is the designation of optimal corrosion control treatment, or OCCT. And as you'll see, there's kind of this natural flow here that ends up with, let's see, all right. So designation of optimal corrosion control treatment, which is phase one. So the system's going to fill out and submit an optimal corrosion control treatment recommendation. And they're going to do this after they've taken entry point water quality samples to just kind of describe their water quality at the time. And they're going to work through this form, which I'm going to show you real quick here. I'll bring it over into view. And so this is a form that was kind of designed by the EPA and provides literally all the guidance that they need to make an initial recommendation for optimized corrosion control treatment. Those water quality parameters that they took, they're going to take a look at their pH. They're going to go through here, and they're going to estimate their dissolved inorganic carbon based on alkalinity and pH. And then they're going to enter into one of these flow charts that we'll just take a look at one right here. So this is selecting treatment for lead only or lead and copper with a pH of less than 7.2. What's the dissolved inorganic carbon? You kind of naturally flow through to where these potential treatments are. The system will select a treatment based on their particular needs or their particular system setup, or maybe there are some concerns that have been raised by Ray Solomon, the division chemist.
4th of July, Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, faces elections next year. The Japanese...
And there we go. Perfect. And so once they've selected their corrosion control here, they'll go all the way down to the bottom of this form, and this is the page that's going to get submitted to us, the division. And they're just going to select the type of treatment, the rationale for the treatment, and typically there's going to be water quality parameters and other data attached to this file. And we're going to store this online in the publicly accessible archive. So once we've designated it, once we've said, yep, we agree with this, this is the corrosion control you're going to install, which again may differ from what the system submits based on specific circumstance or input from Ray or other state specialists, and then we archive the form. And then those forms are now readily available online within the public document archive. That's just a link if you haven't used the archive before, you can go to that link and you'll be presented with it. You'll select your system. And then if you go to those systems and filter for corrosion control treatment recommendation, you'll be able to pull up that file if there's one on file. So if you're an engineer picking up this project from somebody you've contracted to design this for, this should already be on file for you for most systems now and readily available under this heading. From there, they move into phase two, which is the designation of optimized water quality parameters. Obviously, that showed up a little bit earlier than I wanted it to, but that's fine. So the installation of OCCT completed and startups approved by engineering. So they're going to talk about startup later on and what the conditions for that startup are. But if startup values aren't provided in the PTC, the system will be instructed to set initial values based on conversations with state and system personnel. So I'm going to reach out to you and just kind of talk to Ray, talk to everybody, and just kind of get a feel for what's going on and where the system should kind of start their corrosion control journey once it's been installed. Systems instructed to sample water quality parameters daily, and those parameters are just dependent upon what kind of treatment they've installed until their optimized water quality parameters are designated by the state. Designation of those parameters occurs when a system has gone through 2 6-month LCR sampling cycles without an action level exceedance, typically. And that can take anywhere between several months to over a year, depending on the timing of the startup and the timing of compliance sampling. So as an example, if you start up there are 2 sampling periods provided within the rule. There's January 1 through June 30, and then there's July 1 through December 31 for the purposes of water quality parameters. And so, and this 6-month sample cycle. So if you do start up in April and you do your first sampling event, say maybe mid-June, and then you do your second sampling event July 3rd or 4th, and everything's running great, you can be designated at that point and likely moved over to weekly sampling for water quality parameters. And then once that happens and the state is satisfied that, hey, yeah, that's working as intended, everything seems to be operating fine, we haven't had any issues, we designate the OWQPs. We're going to send a fancy form over to the water system and they'll archive it. And that just states what their minimum and maximum, if applicable, levels of either pH or orthophosphate residual or alkalinity are. And again, those are also available on the public archive, and you're just going to filter for optimized water quality parameters. So once we've gotten through phase 2, we're into phase 3, which is the monthly operating report review. And that's just kind of where we're looking for deviations from the OWQPs that were designated. And so these systems need to maintain those OWQPs and not deviate from them more than 9 days during a month, or during a 6-month sampling period. Again, January 1st to June 30th and July 1st to December 31st. Language in this is just as a LCRI update, language in the draft indicates that systems must go back to 6-month LCR sampling if they have this violation. This is not currently true. So systems that currently have these OWQP violations do not go back to 6-month sampling as a result right now, but in the future they will be. So that, or potentially based on the draft language. So it's just something to consider. And then these types of violations are easily avoidable simply by communicating with the state proactively. If we see that there's been a deviation all month and there's been no effort to reach out to us and say, hey, we just had a pump go down, or we're having these problems, or whatever the particular case is, we're probably just going to issue a violation. You need to reach out and talk to us and say, hey, this is going on. And that kind of brings us to questions.
Again, if you don't want to come on live, feel free to put them in the chat and we can address them there, or you can send them in after or wait to the end. Amy.
Hi, I was just wondering if EPA has updated anything since the 2016 corrosion control guidance. Is that still kind of their main?
That's still the mainstay, though they do plan on updating it based on conversations that I've had with them.
Okay, great.
Do you consider a corrosion control index like Langolier index or something like that as part of this process?
It's certainly something that we can take a look at as part of the process, but the EPA's got a pretty streamlined version of what they're looking for. However, if during the design phase, you've got some information that you think is applicable for, maybe going in a different direction with treatment, I don't think that anybody's going to be unreasonable and say, absolutely not. If you've got something good, let's hear it and talk about it, I think.
Yeah, well, some of the corrosion models focus on the Langolier index because, corrosion controls typically, it may be a combination of chemicals. Every water is different, and every water that you treat does different things within the distribution system. So anyway, just
no, I mean,
raising the question.
It's a good, it's a good question, and I don't want to give the impression that information, in the Langolier index isn't a valuable tool to use in determining treatment. There's plenty of cases, and we're dealing with one right now where the water is just it's a complex issue.
Oh yeah,
and
usually
treatment isn't. Yeah, and treatment doesn't jump out as obvious. So
yeah.
I think Amy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as I recall, that guidance document I was asking about has something about the Langolier index in it. I think rather than going with that index, like I think what a lot of the labs are doing is they're calculating that based on other values to get the index. And so rather than using the index, they're recommending you go through those flow charts Joshua was showing where
Yeah.
they have the carbonate and the pH. So just working direct off of those. So it's like, it's getting
Yeah.
at the same kind of thing. But I
It's a
think,
guide.
I think their guidance now is not based on that index because that's already a calculation based on the other values. They just want you to work off the pH and the carbonate. And the other thing is that carbonate scale isn't sufficient in most cases.
We're pretty excited that that those documents are now available through their public-facing database, because it helps us, the division engineers, when we review the project, to know that everybody's looked at those, that initial document with the corrosion control treatment recommendation form. And then that's like a really good like jumping off point for reviewing what's actually submitted, because then we're like, is this even what was discussed about over the past 6 months, or is this something different? And having that as the reference point seems really useful. We're excited about that public facing portion of the database.
Same.
I'm curious as to how many systems besides Champlain are using chloramines and how that fits into the picture. If it does.
At this point, the only system that I'm aware of that's using chloramines is Champlain. Oh, well, there's another system that just came online that's using it as well, but it's off of St. Albans.
What's
But
the
at this
real?
point, sorry, go ahead, Willie.
Well, yeah, I just don't. What's the consideration for using chloramines when it comes to corrosion control treatment?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer, but throwing ammonia into the mix would affect the chemistry. I haven't done corrosion control with a chloraminating system, but I suspect there are reactions that may impact the corrosivity of the water differently than simply a chlorinated water. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm not overly familiar with it at this point. It's definitely something that I want to look at as more systems kind of come online with it.
I mean, the key to chloramination is to maintain the proper ratio between the ammonia and the chlorine, so you don't have excess ammonia or excess chlorine for that matter. And I'm just wondering if by adding any, doing pH adjustment or adding alkalinity or wherever you might go, you'd have to measure how much that might throw off, if at all, the balance between the ammonia and the chlorine. I don't know. Just one of those things hanging out there.
It's a good question.
Yeah, you may never run into it. Although I suspect Champlain must be doing corrosion control. So
Yeah.
all the surface water systems usually are.
Sure.
I would assume that they're all at least doing pH adjustment, because doesn't the filtration usually depress pH, or sometimes they adjust pH to achieve a better filtration?
Depends on the process, but surface water is usually so soft that you'd have to add some stability to it in the way of carbonates, and then finesse the pH. Yeah, I mean, water corrosivity is very challenging. It's very complex from system to system. But, you know, I think you have a good process here to take it through the initial thinking process as to how to approach it.
Yeah, I think that the way that we've got it set up now should facilitate a little bit better, like Willie was saying, just like a really good launching off point for having those
Yeah.
discussions and ensuring that everybody's kind of on that same page to start with, and you know, whatever efficiency gains come from that are, I think, just good all around for everybody.
Well, why don't we focus in a little and talk about where the design and the permitting, like where the division engineers, I guess, since that's my perspective, falls into that regulatory framework. So it really happens like after the need for corrosion control has been identified and the water system moves through those flow charts that Amy and Josh were talking about, that Josh showed, and there's I get so confused. Is it called optimized corrosion control treatment recommendation?
Optimal.
So there's the corrosion control treatment recommendation, and then the water system. So usually either, I don't know, sometimes by that point, the water system may have already started working with their engineer, or at that point they'll go and try and get an engineer to help them complete a design and permit application and do the field inspection on the construction. But that's when we would usually get involved, is once the consulting engineer has gotten that the job to design this, and we get the permit application. So that's like falling in between. The recommendation is made, but the water system hasn't started optimizing anything because it needs to install it. So that's where the division engineers that's where the division engineers have involvement. And then we say, so like our involvement and the permit is really like design, which we see as a permit application, and then construction, which we see as the engineer's certification statement that everything's been constructed correctly. And we usually try and include in the permit a condition to test the equipment. We call it performance testing, but some sample or grouping of test results that show the equipment that was installed can actually adjust pH or feed a residual of orthophosphate. And then once that performance sampling is done and the construction completion certification is submitted by the consulting engineer who did the field inspection, then that closes kind of our permit and our permit involvement. And that's kind of the marking point where Josh would then reach out to the system and say, okay, now these are the samples you need to take, and establish what the initial residual or pH to start up that would need to be going forward, and then adjustments would be made to reach the optimization after that. So I guess I'm just providing a description of that zoomed in view of where the design and construction of these things happen, the places where the division engineers and the consulting engineers would most likely be involved. And then I think all we want to do is hopefully get some discussion about, you know, our experiences in that section of this. So has anybody had experience there that wants to, I don't know if I've said anything that's triggered anybody wanting to chime in. Anybody at all?
I think the bottom line is compliance with the lead and copper rule, right? That's one bottom line. But systems have experienced other problems. Systems have experienced excessive pitting of copper plumbing, for example. because of water corrosion. I know that I can think of another system that was adding silica, which is a little unusual, but has been used for corrosion control. And that would come out if you boil the water, the silica kind of comes out of solution as white spots or particles. That became a problem. But you know, I would think that really the definition of an optimized system is where you don't have those problems, and you're doing it with the least amount of chemicals. From an economic, it's optimized economically. That you're adding just enough chemicals of whatever you're putting in to make all that work. And that sort of falls on the operators after the system is finished and put into service. Usually the consulting engineer is gone to other things, and then it's up to really the operators to make sure that the system is in compliance with the lead and copper rule, that they're not getting complaints from customers related to corrosivity, and that they're not overdoing it with the chemical addition. By the way, I'm from Hoylestown. I'm not representing the entire engineering community here.
Yes, please chime in if you have other things to say. We'd love to hear from, whoever so feels it. But I suppose also not hearing any counter interpretations might mean you are representing the engineering community.
Wow, I've been elevated.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's occurred to me paying attention to these systems going online is there's been a I've always been a little bit confused about like what we're measuring when it comes to the corrosion control treatment, because there is this optimization period, and as you said, Dave, like really what we're looking for is to not violate the lead and copper rule, like for this treatment to actually reduce or eliminate any lead or copper exceedances. And it takes time to identify that goal has been achieved. And so, the typical span of when the engineers are paying attention isn't enough time to know if it's actually worked.
Yeah, there's actually more to it, Willie, now that you mention it. And that is, if you have a system that's been operating, what you don't want to do is change the chemistry overnight. So if you're going to go to whatever you're going to go to, different pH adjustment chemical or different dosage or adding something else, you want to do it very, very gradually because of what's going on the wall, on the interior walls of the pipes. You've got biology taking place. You've got inorganic chemistry taking place. And that can be very easily upset with rapid change in source water chemistry. So, in terms of talking about getting this thing optimized, that's another reason why, yeah, it takes time. It takes time once it's operating. And being optimized on paper and being optimized in the real world can be two different things. Maybe, hopefully not very different, but.
So we put together something like sort of did a you know, in talking about this topic before the sharing session, the division engineers, we kind of thought about what are the things that when we're reviewing a permit application and issuing a permit for a design, like what are some of the things that we want to see in the design or in the basis of design or in the design documents, or just explained as to what was happening. And, you know, that one of them was the recommendation, you know, the accepted recommendation and for treatment, like what treatment are we actually doing? And then and then like why are we doing it, or if there's a change, why is there's a change? But then we just had a couple of other, like, what are some other things that you know we wanted to see? So we made a list. Did we make a list? We made a short list. And we thought we would kind of share that and then ask, are there other things people want to think about when they're if they've done a corrosion control treatment design? What are some of the other things you thought about? Are there resources, you know, books or other sources of design guidance or criteria that you use that are good that you'd want to share? Like, you know, our go-to resource is Ray Solomon, and you know, I think this is a topic that we know he likes to dive into, and so we always find it valuable to ask him about it whenever we have a project, and that's totally open to everybody. Ray, yeah, he loves talking about corrosion control treatment, and he'll talk to engineers or water systems or operators or anybody. So we're just wondering, what are some of the design criteria you always think are important when doing this treatment, and do you have any resources that you'd be willing to share or recommend?
Willie, what's in the design requirements in Vermont that for preventing overfeed of hydroxide, for example?
I don't know.
That's
The
besides, I mean, chem feed is fairly simple, right? I mean, until you sort of get into it a little bit, but what you really want to do is prevent an overfeed of hydroxide. There was a case I can recall back when in Worcester, Massachusetts, where there was an overfeed of hydroxide that sent a lot of people to the hospital. Took showers. They were hit with excess caustic. So that would be, you know, key number one is what kind of instrumentation, and I'd have to go back and I can dig up some stuff for you because it is in the Massachusetts design regulations. How you prevent overfeed of something like a hydroxide. That's more important than underfeeding, although that's important too.
Yeah, if you could send us those resources, that would be great to look into.
I have to dig it up.
I'd appreciate that. Allison?
Just offer that we always ask more questions when it's sodium hydroxide as opposed to soda ash, or it's just it's a lot of concerns come with sodium hydroxide storage, operator safety.
Yeah.
We just want to see a lot more when it comes to that, because the changes to pH can happen more rapidly. Blindness is a huge concern for as far as operator safety. So I'm not sure that there isn't an overfeed prevention requirement that comes to mind immediately, but we get into it a little deeper when sodium hydroxide is proposed, as opposed to like soda ash.
I've had a case where a hydroxide feed pump stayed on while the well pump was off, put in a slug of hydroxide into the discharge pipeline, and then the pump kicks on and pushes that out into the system. But I'll look and see what I can find on that.
I imagine that's one of the main I mean, for cyber terrorism or, bad actors messing with treatment plant controls, sodium hydroxide seems like one of the more important ones to be able to control like that. And yeah, having some kind of extra stop on an overfeed would, be a pretty important thing to be able to achieve. I not something that I come across before.
Do you have online pH monitoring on the discharge?
I don't think it's required.
I would require it. If you're doing pH adjustment, I would require online pH adjustment on the discharge.
Well, we have a lot of water systems that are adjusting pH with soda ash.
Mm-hmm.
And I think their only requirement is to record the pH every day. That's, yeah.
Amy?
Yeah, I was just wondering, for the hydroxides, are there many choices in terms of how concentrated what you're working with is? I mean, I just know on a small scale for ordering it for a lab, it comes in a whole variety of different concentrations. Certainly if you're dealing with a more dilute hydroxide, that would help a little with the overfeeding risk and the safety thing a little bit, though it's all pretty much caustic, even though it's lower strength. So is that something you guys have to look at in terms of the choice of feed of like, or is it all pretty much the same?
I think the hydroxide does come in different percentages and has different freeze temperatures. And I'm trying to remember which way that goes. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've done this. But if you're concerned about freezing, you would go with a different strength of hydroxide. There is a difference. There is a freezing difference, temperature difference between different strengths.
Amy, part of my, like, if someone was proposing it on an application that I was reviewing, I would ask what they anticipated receiving as neat, whatever dilution they were anticipating receiving as neat, and whether they anticipated making any adjustments, how they were going to store it. And so I don't know every available one, but I would try to ask them kind of to get to some of that. Because stuff like whether like as Dave mentioned, whether the building is heated, stuff like that comes into affects both sodium hydroxide and soda ash. Soda ash can fall out of solution. You might be looking at, the solubility of soda ash. The temperature is a big player in that, and how much mixing you need. So I don't have that off the top of my head, but those would be the types of questions that we would ask to try to understand that everyone's on the same page, that it's been thought through, and the operator has an idea of what they would be ordering and if there are any limitations around that.
I think the typical percentage of soda ash in the solution is 25%. But if I remember right, the 50% solution has a lower freezing point.
Ted?
Yeah, coming from my background as an operator, we use sodium hydroxide for pH adjustment, and we used 18%. I know a lot of places use 50%. The 18 isn't nearly as strong, though definitely corrosive. And some of the things we had in place to prevent overfeeds, we had anti-siphon and flow pacing, and we constantly monitored pH. And then we could log in and see real time what pH was, though we didn't have any operational way of changing that. But that's basically what we did. I just figured maybe that would be helpful to everyone.
One type of chemical feeder that I like for small systems and for remote applications is calcium hydroxide, which is basically, it's a solid. It's what you put in pools. And there are feeders that use what we call, a lot of us call hockey pucks. It's a solid piece of calcium hydroxide. And what it does, there's a few different types of feeders on the market, but it kind of grinds it as you go, drops the grindings into the solution tank, small solution tank, to keep the solution at the right dosage or percentage. But those are really nice. There's no liquid to handle. There's no liquid hydroxide. As Amy was talking about some of the hazards of dealing with liquids, and they're very safe. There's just a small secondary confinement area that you really need for the solution tank. They're pretty nice systems.
Can you think of anywhere where you know that's being used, Dave?
Boy, this goes way back, Willie. There are systems in New Hampshire. I want to say Merrimack, but I could be wrong on that, Willie. But they're in use. They're in use. We'd have to think of who reps them these days. I can send some, references on that or some information on that.
Yeah, I mean,
they're very reliable.
That would be my initial concern, because it's probably not the same thing, but it sounds similar to, you said hockey puck, to an erosion chlorinator, which we don't really like. We don't really feel like erosion chlorinators are very consistent. And so I don't know if we have any left in Vermont, but we've certainly been trying to get those out of use. But this sounds like it would be different to some degree, and I'd be interested in seeing it.
Okay. But there's hardly any operator requirement. Can be out in the boonies someplace. And again, it's nice for a very small application.
I don't know if we had any more thoughts. Has anybody been involved in bringing the corrosion control treatment online at any water systems recently?
Take that as a no. Got any more prompts, Willie?
I don't know. Is anybody working on a corrosion control treatment design? I guess we didn't get any of none of the engineers who currently have the applications in with us have called in. I don't know if it's useful to talk about, but I'm wondering if, and Dave, maybe since you work in Massachusetts a lot too, if I don't think there's any way. I think there's a need to permit the installation of this equipment, but like, given that it is the long-term application of the corrosion control to achieve the optimization and take care of any lead and copper issues, is there a simpler way to get these things designed and brought online than our typical hire a consulting engineer to put together a set of drawings and specifications, submit a permit application, us review it, issue a permit, and then move into construction? Is there a simpler way to do it that is safe and will achieve a similar result? Sometimes I think it's hard to do that. Like there's certainly operators who could handle putting all the pieces together and starting up corrosion control treatment on their own, but then there's a bunch of water systems who don't have that capability too.
But you can buy a kind of a turnkey system, where you've got your chem feed pumps and all your associated, tubing and valves, the vacuum brake valve and the three-way valve or whatever, and the tank, and all comes on it. Call it a skid, if you will. And it's kind of a plug and play thing, but you still need a design to bid it. And somebody still has to specify what you want to go in it. But those are nice. Those are really nice, because then you're not relying on either the engineer or the contractor to put all the pieces and parts together properly. And not that it's all that complicated, but it does simplify that part of it.
Do any equipment suppliers come to mind who provide those packages?
Let me dig something up for you. We're speccing it now on some wastewater projects, but I've been out of design for a while. So, but they've become very popular.
Yeah.
For chem feed systems.
That's a good thing. And that might be something to look for at the next trade show or industry conference. See if somebody is repping something like that.
I mean, they were advertised in the journals and so forth. AWWA and WEF.
We've been getting those journals. Nathan has been reading them, and recently I caught on to the fact that we are actually getting them. I haven't been reading them recently, but Nathan has them, and I don't
We
know if
have
anybody else.
we have several years of a backlog if you want to do some light reading in the next couple days.
But they do have the advertisements in it from the vendors for some of the stuff we've been talking about.
All right. Well, I also wanted to. I have some news, some of my news to share. That I'm leaving the division, so I won't be at our next sharing session, and I won't be reviewing any more projects. So I'll be my last day with the state is tomorrow. But I thought I'd let people know that here. Other Sienna also share your change. Is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine.
Sienna is also leaving the division to take a job closer to where she lives, which we're very excited for.
But yes, your point people are going to change a little bit. So you send an email to one of us and don't get a response back. That's why. But I do hope that these sharing sessions continue. Because the attendance has been increasing, the participation's been increasing, and I think it's been really good. So thank you all for helping keep it alive.
Sienna, your organization and actually doing the work to get them set up and invitations sent and getting us to talk about what we're going to actually talk about, I think has been actually your work has actually made them happen. So thank you.
Yeah, I can write a guide on what to do. It's copy and pasting a list of contacts. Yeah, does anybody have any last minute thoughts or bids for what you'd like to discuss next time? We only have a few minutes left. I'll send out the follow-up email and feel free to respond to that instead. But it's always nice to hear from the people directly. Or would any of you like to present? We're always open to that too. All right, well, do you think of something? Please let us know. Internally, are there any last things that you guys want to cover?
Just one of our
Summer.
common resources is water quality and treatment. Nathan has a newer edition, but mine's the 5th edition. So if you're wondering what we're looking at, we tend to refer to that AWWA handbook, the rule and EPA's guidance.
And what Ray says.
Yeah. Shame he's always doing something too fun to join us, because I know he could fill this hour and more. But all right.
Well, thanks very much. I know I've enjoyed participating in this. And I wish you both success where you're going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And yeah.
Yeah, well, I will do my best to get something lined up, at least for the next one, some ideas in place. So whoever takes over feels obligated to make it happen. Otherwise, I will release you all from your assumed lunch break or whatever you're doing. But thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Sienna.
All right, Willie, I'll see you in the next one.
All right. Bye.